It would be extraordinary to sit here and in the next 10 years watch these giant, iconic animals who have been such an integral part of who we are as human beings disappear because we all sat around and did nothing.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 68. Can drones be used to save endangered wildlife from poachers? If you ask that question of today's guest, he'd say it's already happening. John Petersen is an aviator, author, professional futurist, and chairman of the Charles A. and Anne Morrow Lindbergh Foundation. At the Lindbergh Foundation, he led the launch of their Air Shepherd initiative, which funds and helps deploy drones across southern Africa to combat acute poaching of rhinos and elephants. As we'll hear today from John, in the past few years, more than 100,000 elephants have been killed by poachers, and drones represent the most efficient tool to deter this practice. And we'll also learn how you can support this effort. So let's pick up the interview where I asked John to introduce himself.
John Petersen is my name, and I'm the chairman of the board of the Charles A. and Anne Morrow Lindbergh Foundation.
Can you tell me a little bit about the foundation? What is it and how it got started?
Charles Lindbergh, of course, was the first guy to fly single-handedly across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. And he became the world's first celebrity. And he and his wife then flew around the world in places and were pioneer aviators, and they were looking for new airline routes. The beginning of international air travel was started by Charles and Anne Lindbergh. What a lot of people don't know is that they were conservationists. They were very interested in the environment. And at the same time, they, of course, were pilots, and so they were interested in technology. And so they gave a goodly part of the last part of their lives to projects that they say balance technology with the environment. And a year after Lindbergh died, a number of his friends came together and they started what became the Lindbergh Foundation to continue that legacy of funding projects that balance technology and the environment. We've been focusing on aviation-oriented projects for the last couple years, and our major project is the Air Shepherd program.
Before we get into Air Shepherd, how long have you been with the Lindbergh Foundation?
I've been on the board for about 9 years, I think, now.
Let's talk about the Air Shepherd program, which I think is really interesting. What is it, and how does it work?
Well, the Lindbergh Foundation helped to fund a couple of the aircraft that are in the air wing of the Kenya Wildlife Service. So we had a long relationship with the Kenya Wildlife Service, and one day, about 5 years ago, I was sitting with a representative from KWS talking to him about their poaching activities, and he was telling me that the poachers were shooting at their pilots, and separately that they had crashed one of their airplanes recently and the pilot had been killed. And I'm an aviator. I used to fly airplanes off aircraft carriers for the Navy, build an airplane. I've got a board full of some of the best known pilots in the world, and we know airplanes and we know how expensive they are and all the problems associated with them. And it occurred to me, and then this guy says, and we can't fly at night, and the poachers all operate at night. We own the day, but the poachers own the night. And that, of course, is kind of a structural problem in the whole thing. And so I got to thinking about it, and it occurred to me that drones, and I was familiar primarily with military drones at the time, drones could be a solution here because they could fly at night. They have infrared cameras, so they can see thermal images. But more than that, they would be a whole lot cheaper, easier to maintain. Nobody'd get killed in the process. And you could proliferate them a lot farther. And so I ran around the country, talked to 4 or 5 different drone manufacturers to see if the idea made any sense. And they said, oh, yeah, sure. Just bring us $2 million and we'll sell you the same drone that we give to the military. And that obviously was a non-starter. So I poked around a little bit more and found out that there were smaller airplanes that had very capable infrared cameras, and that then gave kind of substance to the whole notion, and so we started to push ahead. For a number of reasons, it became clear that the best thing for us to do was to, instead of starting in Kenya, start in South Africa. And the principal one was because we found that there was an operating company in South Africa called UAV and Drone Solutions, which had already invested almost $2 million in using drones in anti-poaching. And they by far knew more about all this stuff than anybody else did. And so we set up the Air Shepherd program to be an umbrella organization to help build a brand and awareness around the use of drones for against poaching. And at the same time to raise money and get broad awareness, to build brand awareness for this whole thing, because it really seemed you didn't have to be too smart to know that if you could see at night and nobody else could see at night and the poaching was at night, that there would be a significant advantage there. And so we began our relationship with UDS, that's UAV and Drone Solutions, back a couple of years ago now. And we're now at the point where we are flying teams in South Africa and Malawi and Zimbabwe. And so it's moving along.
So the drones can see at night. You have teams working at night that are then communicating. How do you actually catch the poachers?
The way you catch the poachers, of course, is that you work with the rangers on the ground or the police or whoever the authorities are. And you brief beforehand where the mission area is that night. And then we operate with a two-person team, a pilot and a sensor operator. And the pilot flies the airplane and launches it and keeps track of the navigating, where the thing's going. And the sensor operator sees a real-time feed of the video that's coming from the infrared camera. And so they sit there and monitor during the flight looking for anomalies. We fly in places where it's illegal for humans to be at night. We're in provincial parks and national game parks, and nobody's supposed to be there at night. So if you see a human being or if you see a vehicle, then it's clearly out of place. And when we do that, then we can call the rangers on the radio and send them over there. And because we've agreed to work in a certain area, then the rangers are not too far away, and we can get them over there in time.
I see. What type of successes have you had since the program's been put in place?
Well, we got involved with UDS because they had been working, like I say, for 2 years, 6 months of which had been testing under the auspices of the Civil Aviation Authority of South Africa. Very quietly. Very, very few people knew that this was going on because at the time there was a ban on using drones in Africa, but they had an exception, an exclusion. And so they had flown for 6 months, both in KwaZulu-Natal, which is over by Durban, over by the Indian Ocean, and up in Kruger National Park. And what they found out was, in absolute terms, that whenever they flew, the poaching stopped. In one situation, they were flying in an area that for the previous 2 years, there had been between 12 and 18 rhinos killed every year or every month for the previous 2 years. And the day they started flying, the poaching stopped, and they flew for 6 months. And the day they quit, the poaching started again. We've seen that same pattern happen other places in KwaZulu-Natal more recently. Just a matter of months ago, as a matter of fact. And so we say that where we fly, the poaching stops. Now, it's important to understand that a lot of this is deterrent because the Jungle Telegraph sends out the word because the poachers have a fairly robust and sophisticated intelligence network. And they tell them that we're up and we're flying and so on. And so that shuts down the poaching in the area. But we'll take that. That's a success as far as we're concerned, because what we're interested in is trying to save the animals.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. We didn't really get into it, just we jumped into the program, but can you provide sort of a description of the magnitude of the poaching problem in Africa today?
Yeah, the poaching problem in Africa is really extraordinary. Last year, for example, 40,000 elephants were killed by poachers. And the year before, 40,000 elephants were killed. And the year before that, 30,000 were killed. And the year before that, 25,000 were killed. And between 2010 and 2012, 100,000 elephants were killed. And at that level of poaching, all of the elephants in the wild will be extinct within about 10 years. And the problem is equally acute for rhinos. And the reason for that is that the price and the value of rhino horns and elephant tusks are just amazing. A single rhino horn, that kind of retail street value in Vietnam, is reportedly upwards to $700,000. I mean, it's amazing.
Oh my God.
And the pair of elephant tusks, ivory tusks, are something like $150,000 in China. But the problem is not only China, by the way, for ivory. The second largest market for ivory is the United States. But the value is so high. Rhino horns are worth almost as much as heroin and more than gold. The value is so high of these things that it's also starting to bring terrorist groups and organized crime in because it's such big money. And it's relatively easy. It has been relatively easy to acquire it. And so it's a huge problem. And it's an existential problem, and for me, at least, it would be extraordinary to sit here and in the next 10 years watch these giant, iconic animals who have been such an integral part of who we are as human beings disappear because we all sat around and did nothing. And so that's the part of the reason why I'm involved.
To keep the program moving along and growing, what sort of funding do you need and what kind of partners are involved in helping to keep the program operating?
The funding is a function of how we operate a little bit, and we operate out of a mobile command vehicle, which is like a four-wheel drive van, if you will. And in the back of that, there are 2, if not 3, operating positions. And the vehicle then goes out to near the operating area, and we have a telescoping mast that's 40 feet high that gets extended. And on the top of the mast is an antenna. And the antenna is what keeps connected to the drones and brings the information back and provides navigation information for the drones. And so there are a couple of interesting things about that, and I'll tell you how that all contributes to the cost here. Number one, we have developed all of our own airplanes. We're in the 4th generation of aircraft. They're purpose-built. We now are up to an aircraft that flies for almost 5 hours on a single charge, which is really pretty extraordinary for a device that's kind of a working aircraft and not just an experimental kind of thing. And more than that, what we've developed is the ability to control and maintain control of the aircraft for 40 to 50 kilometers away. And so what the antenna does is automatically track the airplane wherever it goes and brings the video feed, among other things, back into the command center. So there are 3 airplanes in a command center and 2 people who operate that. And you need, after about 3 or 4 weeks on the road or in the bush, working every night, you got to let these guys off and give them a little R&R, or they'll go crazy. And so you really need an equivalent of 3 people for every operating team. And when you add all of that all up and you operate it for a year, it ends up being about $400,000 more or less, which is kind of less money by a third than just the cost of a single airplane that I was looking at originally. And so we are flying 2 teams in South Africa and 1 team in Malawi and 1 team in Zimbabwe. We've just started there, and we're in communications and we're in discussions with Mozambique and Zambia and Botswana, and have had conversations with folks from Kenya as well as Tanzania. So there's about 8 or so countries, or 9 maybe, who have indicated an interest in having our drones work because they work so well. And so we have partnered up with the World Wildlife Fund. WWF some years ago got a $5 million grant from the Google Foundation. and to, in fact, use drones in anti-poaching work. And after trying it unsuccessfully by themselves, they came to us and said, you guys know more about this than anybody else. What we'd like to do is help fund some of your new operations as you open up new countries. And so they are funding the early operations in Malawi and Zimbabwe and hopefully Zambia and maybe Botswana. And so Lindbergh Foundation and the Air Shepherd obligations are to keep the funding going after this initial money from World Wildlife runs out. And that runs out kind of the middle part of next year. And so that's why we're undergoing a significant fundraising campaign that's starting here about the end of September. And we'll be on Indiegogo, and we'll be doing some peer-to-peer work on Classy, working our way up toward the holidays. And we hope to raise a significant amount of money that helps to sustain the underlying operation and expand it into some of these new countries.
So one of the messages to people that hear the podcast would be if they're interested in supporting an anti-poaching or saving the wildlife in Africa, to go to the Air Shepherd's webpage and learn how they can contribute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go to www.airshepherd.com. Or if you want to go to the Lindbergh Foundation, and it's just Lindbergh Foundation, LINDBERGH Foundation.org. I'm sorry, and it's airshepherd.org. If I said .com, it's airshepherd.org. And in both cases, you'll be able to find what we're doing. And then, of course, we'll have an Indiegogo page up at the end of the month and the beginning of October. And so there'll be plenty of places, and we've got a lot of activity lining up, publicity and so on. And so hopefully your listeners will run into us any of a number of places.
That's great. Other than the potential funding to keep the program going over the long run, what are some of the other challenges you foresee to growing this program in the areas that it's been targeted?
This has challenges in a couple of different areas, and one of them is in terms of kind of technology that support the operations, and another one is alternative incentives. And let me talk first about the technology and then about the incentives. First of all, we have now flown 6,000 hours about, and maybe 4,000 missions, and there is nobody in the world that's even come close to anything like that. Our pilots were the first licensed drone pilots in the world, licensed by the Civil Aviation Authority of South Africa. They're called commercial airline pilots, and our operating partner is considered a commercial airline. So they had to go through all of the training, the theoretical stuff in the airways. They didn't have to fly airliners, of course, but they went through all of that. And they're the only ones in the country. The United States is just starting to license pilots, and so we were the first. We also, as I mentioned, fly exclusively at night, and we fly beyond line of sight. And up until just a week or so ago, so I'm told, you could not even get an exclusion in the United States for civilians to fly beyond line of sight or to fly at night. And we do both of that. So I think we're probably the only civilians in the world who, by that I mean non-military, that exclusively fly at night and fly beyond line of sight. That said, this is a very tedious and laborious kind of process when every night you get out there and for 5 or 6 hours maybe just sit there and you look at screens and you launch and recover these airplanes and just sit there and stare at screens trying to figure out if what you're seeing is something that is important. And that's really hard. The United States, the military drone pilots are generating all kinds of fatigue and problems around doing the same kind of thing. And we're finding that to be the case in our operations as well. And so one of the things we're working on from a couple of different directions is to develop pattern recognition technologies that can sit there and in the middle of the video stream and look at the images that are coming from the ground and determine which are vehicles and which are animals and which are people and so on. And then put up an alert so that the operator only has to kind of stare at the screen intently if there's an alert that shows up. And so we've developed some of our own technology in that space. Some of our design team in South Africa are extraordinary electrical engineers. And so we developed some of our own pattern recognition software, and then we're also going to start working, hopefully, with some neural network parallel processing learning capabilities that also do pattern recognition. There's another piece of technology that's important to us, and that is predictive analytics. Little drones are extraordinary kind of leverage to the rangers and to the anti-poaching people, but they're nevertheless limited. Some of these game parks are as big as the state of Connecticut, and if all you got is a little airplane the size of a big model airplane, then to know where to fly is a pretty significant issue, particularly if you don't have any intelligence and on the ground and have some idea where the animals are and where the poachers are likely to be. And so there's a real opportunity, a significant and interesting opportunity to use some of the data, historical data, from where the poaching has happened in the past and animal movements, and you use current intelligence to tell you where the animals are and take meteorological information about it and where it's raining and where the water holes are full and what time of the month it is and whether it's a full moon and so on. And anyway, in time, we're convinced that we can get patterns and information to start to be predictive and say, well, tonight, this is the most likely place where you're going to have poaching, and so this is where you should operate. So we're working in that area. Secondly, and what's really important here, and it's probably a unique way in which we approach this is a systems problem. Poaching is only one piece of a larger kind of system, and the major nodes of the system include things like corruption and the issues related to education and awareness. But one of the big nodes in the system is alternative incentives. The poachers are tacitly supported by the communities, and there's no reason for them not to, even if they know about who the poachers are, not to hassle them. And so what we're trying to do is provide an alternative incentive that produces alternative value from kind of just sustaining or casting a blind eye to the poachers. And so one of the technological things we're doing is putting in place with some brand new technology that's really pretty capable, and we're testing it right now, is to put Wi-Fi, broadband Wi-Fi, that has very large coverage. It has from a single kind of radio that goes out to 50 kilometers. And so we can take a pretty sizable game park, and with just a couple of these radios, we can cover the whole park. The advantage to us in operations is that we can fly the drones anywhere within that coverage area, and we can run them from a fixed location or off of an iPhone on the other side of the world because it's connected into the internet. And so we don't need to have the mobile operation, the mobile command centers go out. But the real advantage and the interesting kind of side benefit of this is that what it will provide is internet coverage for the villages in the area that have nothing like that right now. And that could be a substantial kind of benefit from both economically and socially to those folks. And we will brand it and tie it to the well-being of the animals and therefore be an alternative incentive. And so these kinds of things are also developments that we're trying to bring along, all of which would require some kind of some level of kind of funding, but they give you a significant advantage over the poachers, because if we stay far enough ahead and run fast enough, they'll never be able to deal with those levels of sophistication.
That all sounds really good, John. Are there aspects of the program that I didn't ask about that we should talk about?
Well, no, we've found universal kind of support from the different countries we've talked to. I've worked my way around the ambassadors of all of these countries that I've mentioned here, and all of them are kind of want us to welcome us with open arms. And so it's just a matter of generating the funding and the awareness for all of this. And I mean, it's uniquely successful, and so kind of operates at this kind of cool intersection between drones and elephants, if you will, which generate a great deal of kind of interest by individuals. And so we think that we have something that's really rather extraordinary, and that in time we can expand it. I'm looking to expand it ultimately, I think, to maybe 40 or 45 different operating units in the field. And if we can get it up to that level, then in, like I say, 7 or 8 or 9 countries, then I think working with the folks who are doing really good work on the demand side of the equation, working in China and Vietnam, as well as the United States, to tamp down the demand. We work on the supply side, and between the two of us, I think in 4 or 5 years, we could probably get this down to where it's manageable. I don't think you'll ever get rid of poaching, but you get it down to where it's manageable and it wasn't existential. And so that's what we're aiming for, try to get it up to where we've got enough airplanes in the air that we can really manage it. And then you can start thinking about other things that you can do with these aircraft, and you can go after illegal logging and illegal fishing, but you can also use them in lots of very interesting ways during the daytime to do census work and for agriculture and any of a number of commercial kind of ways in which you can generate revenue from them, looking with mining and with, managing. They use them a lot to check out power, high-tension power lines, and so on. But anyway, the drones are here to come. They sold 1 million drones in the United States last year. They'll sell 2 million drones this year. The technology is expanding like just crazy. It's like a cell phone was, or a smartphone maybe 10 or 12 years ago, where it was very simple, and then people figured out that you can, that essentially this was a computer and you could put all these apps on top of it. Well, that's exactly the case. It's a perfect analogy for what's happening with drones, because what they are is flying computers. And so not only are the command and control and navigation and so on and systems all getting much, much better, new batteries, new other kind of things, but also the sensor systems that you can hang on these airplanes are just becoming wild and crazy. I mean, we're already looking at radar and lasers and any of a number of things that we can do. And so what you'll be able to do with little drones like ours in 3 years, you can't even think about today. That's literally the case. It's just amazing what's coming down the stream. And so we're kind of surfing this wave into a whole new technological era. And these little airplanes are going to be ubiquitous in time and operate in swarms and with, number of them all networked together and so on, and you just don't know where it's going, but it's certainly coming and it's going somewhere, and we're going to try to use that, stay ahead of it, and help to kind of define it in our space where we work against the poachers.
It's great, John. Why don't we close? If you got any final comments on the Air Shepherds program that you'd like to leave with us?
Well, Air Shepherd represents, I think, an extraordinary kind of nexus of not only some advanced technology that we are developing and using, but in a very kind of sophisticated area where there's an extraordinary problem. I think kind of in general, the conservation area is not known for really being out on the forward edge of particularly information and other kind of sensor technology and things like that. I don't want to overstate that, but there are a lot of well-meaning people that are doing a lot of really good work, but you don't kind of think of conservation in terms of those kind of high tech. And I think that what we're finding is that we've found a place where we can really leverage some of the earliest and most interesting kind of technology. And we think there's a real future for it. And we have just wonderful people that we've volunteers and others that have come together to help make this whole thing happen. And so we're very encouraged about the future of this, and very thankful for all the help that we've gotten from so many different places.
That's it for episode 68 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from John Petersen of the Lindbergh Foundation and learning about the important work of the Air Shepherd Initiative. I want to thank John for taking the time to speak with me. The Air Shepherd Initiative needs our help to keep drones flying over the African wildlife parks, so please consider donating. To donate or to learn more about the program, check out the website at airshepherd.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And as always, I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.